Lagos, the heart of Nigeria, the megacity of Africa, and a melting pot of culture and people. With a current population estimate of more than 20 million, it's among the top 10 fastest growing cities and urban areas in the world. The amazing thing about Lagos is not just that it started as an unpromising fishing village, but that, even the first European voyagers to come upon it thought it had no chance of succeeding as a city, because of its peculiar layout of islands, lagoons and creeks, and they ignored it for a time. Even Lagos' current bad reputation, which has entered the field of urban legends, is nothing new. Way back in the 1860s, when the British decided to formally annex the city, one colonial officer is said to have commented that Lagos is a deadly gift. So how did a small fishing village transition to a colonial hub and finally a global megacity with bustling streets and towering skyscrapers? This is the story of Lagos, the most influential city in Africa. To trace the journey of Lagos, our story must begin before Nigeria existed, and even before this tropical lowland dominated by bodies of water was named Acre, its indigenous name preferred by Lagosians. The earliest information about Lagos is from oral history and references to the area in European maps. With regards to archaeological discoveries, a 2007 dig in the vicinity of the Lekki Peninsula, where pottery shards, stone tools, and evidence of early human habitation were unearthed, tentatively suggests that there was a settlement in the area thousands of years ago, but we are yet to get published evidence of a detailed timeline or radiocarbon dating from the dig. So my attempt at a timeline chart for Lagos starts with the accepted oral tradition of its origin. According to oral history, the founder of the area that would later be referred to as Acre was Ogunfunminire, a grandson of Oduduwa, the legendary father of the Yorubas. In the early 15th century, Ogunfunminire was said to have left Ife Kingdom after the death of his father to settle along Ogun River, in a place they named Isheri, a community now located on the border between Lagos State and Ogun State. Ogunfunminire and the people with him took on the name Awari. At some point, the Awari people left Isheri to get away from what is remembered as the War of the World, a conflict raging in the hinterland. They settled in a place named Abatemeta, a fishing village on the mainland, from where Ogunfunminire ruled over the communities subsequently founded by his people, so the Awari people became the first settlers in Lagos. Ogunfunminire acquired the title Olorfin and his 12 children became the Idejo, the white-capped chiefs of Lagos, who till this day own a lot of land in Lagos, and are the custodians of Lagos oral history. Because the mainland was subject to attacks by warring kingdoms from the hinterland, Aramura, one of the Idejo, was the first to move from Abatemeta to Edo Island and later across the water to the relative security of what is now Lagos Island. Other Idejo subsequently moved to establish villages in Lagos Island and Victoria Island. Fishing was the main occupation of the inhabitants of the villages, but they also hunted and farmed. It's said that from the time of Ogunfunminire, the Awaris and neighboring Yoruba tribes often met at Edo Wharf to trade. Written records of Lagos from this time are scarce. The first known reference to the area was in a 15th century Portuguese map that featured the lagoon but did not indicate that there was any settlement in the area. An European visitor in 1485 observed that there is no trade in this country nor anything from which one can make a profit. It was therefore of little importance to the Portuguese traders, who established a presence nearby to trade with the Ijebus, another Yoruba tribe, and further along the coast they established relations with the Benin Kingdom. But it is safe to say that the European explorers' lack of knowledge about the Lagos area and its inhabitants at the time could have been due to the difficulty in gaining access to the area. One voyager to the coast wrote about heaven's high breakers that shut off the entrance to the lagoon and rendered the mainland unapproachable. By the mid-17th century, a few maps by Dutch cartographers referred to the Lagos Island area as Ichoo, definitely an attempt to spell echo, the indigenous name still used by Lagosians, and the general area as Lago de Curamo. Shortly thereafter, as seen on some maps, the whole area was being referred to as Lagos, probably adapted from the word lago meaning lake in Portuguese. Now we come to the Benin Kingdom imprint. By the 13th century, the Edo people to the east of Lagos had forged a powerful kingdom in Benin City, and by the 16th century, It dominated trade with the Europeans and was so pervasive that European cartographers named the coastline to its south the Bight of Benin. At Benin, the Portuguese bought beads, cloth, pepper and slaves, which were exported to Europe and the Americas, and the island of São Tomé. In the late 16th century, the Oba of Benin sent war canoes to attack Edo in an effort to retain control of trade in the region. Although the attacks were repulsed successfully, the Benis established a military camp in Lagos Island. Actually, the Benin Kingdom's primary target was not Lagos, but its location was important to cutting off the Ijebus from trading with the Europeans, and Lagos also provides a clear route to taking over Dahomey, a more advantageous port. It's been said that the name Acor comes from the Bini word for war camp, but this has been disputed by some historians, who claim Acor is an adaptation of the Yoruba word Herekor, which means farmstead. Not long after settling in their camp on the island, the Benin military commanders established a ceremonial meeting of the heads of the local communities, and this developed into a governing council. By the mid-17th century, Lagos had become an outpost of the Benin Kingdom. The first recognizable viceroy was Arshipa, an Awari warrior, who on escorting the body of one of the original Bini war leaders back to Benin for burial, so impressed the Oba of Benin that the Oba appointed him to oversee the communities and exact tribute from them. Shortly thereafter, the viceroys took on the title of Oba, like the Binis. The ownership of the land in Lagos remained securely in the hands of the Idejo, and the Idejo would eventually take over the Obaship. Lagos gained considerable importance from its role as the outpost of Benin in the lagoon area. It became a center of commercial activities. But Benin dominance did not last long in the region. Sometime in the second half of the 18th century, Oba Akinchemoyin, the ruler of Lagos at the time, made a deal with the Portuguese. This deal advanced Lagos' development as a slave port, as well as opened it up to a wider range of trade, and this independent wealth creation altered the balance of power between the Oba of Lagos and the Benin monarchy. This arrangement was timely because by this period, Africa had become firmly identified in the Western mind as the source of slave labor for the New World plantations, and Lagos, due to its strategic location on the coast to the south of a number of Nigeria's most prosperous kingdoms linking them to the European merchants, became a crucial center. Further cementing Lagos' importance was the unrest caused by the ambitions of the warrior kingdom of Dahomey to its west. Dahomey conquests disrupted trade routes and refugees fled towards Lagos. Many foreign slave traders moved away from the Dahomey region to establish slave factories in Badagry, Epe and other Lagos ports. The Portuguese were initially the main movers of the Atlantic trade, but by the 18th century the British had eclipsed them. As the volume of the slave trade increased, Portuguese, English, Dutch, French and other merchants opened what was known as factories along the Bight of Benin to facilitate the trade in humans. By the end of the 18th century, the focus of the slave trade had switched to Lagos. The city had been transformed from a site of regional trade to a major international port linking West Africa's hinterland to the Atlantic world. In the opening years of the 19th century, Lagos was said to have a growing population of about 5,000, with a small international merchant community living off slavery and other forms of trade. Then came the abolition of the slave trade by the British in 1807, although it should be noted that following the French Revolution, the French were the first to abolish slavery in 1793, and to start a campaign against West African slave trade. French naval squadrons swept the coast of Africa arresting slave traders and their ships, including British ones. Unfortunately, Napoleon reimposed the trade about a decade later. Following the British abolition, the Royal Navy West Africa Squadron was established and it mounted pressure on Lagos to stop the slave trade. It was at this time that the British intervened in the fight for the throne of Lagos in a totally philanthropic desire to end this inhumane trade in slaves and extend civilization to Lagos. Just kidding, they wanted unfettered access to control the trade in palm oil textiles and other local products that were now in demand in Europe due to industrialization. The feud between Oba Akitoyi and Oba Kosoko gave them the excuse to take over. In 1841, Akitoyi ascended the throne as the Oba of Lagos, but his fiery nephew, Kosoko, contended that the throne was rightfully his. Their rivalry boiled over in 1846 and Kosoko staged a coup, forcing Akintoye to flee from Lagos. Akintoye found refuge in Abeokuta, nursing his wounds and plotting his return. That's when he turned to the unlikeliest of allies, the British. Akintoye, ever the opportunist, moved to Badagry and offered the British a deal: help me reclaim my throne, and I'll abolish the slave trade in Lagos. The British, seeing an opportunity to expand their influence in the region, eagerly agreed. Kosoko was branded as the arch-perpetrator of the slave trade, even though Akintoye had in fact been a slave trader before he was overthrown. The first attempt to depose Kosoko in November 1851 was unsuccessful. Lagos was much better defended than expected. Kosoko was no fool. He had fortified Lagos with a network of barricades and armed his warriors with muskets and cannons. Then on Christmas Day 1851, the British warship, HMS Bloodhound, reinforced by 2 other warships, and many smaller armed and manned boats attacked Lagos. For 2 days, the air was filled with the roar of cannons and the screams of battle. The British, with superior firepower, relentlessly bombarded Kosoko's strongholds. Smoke and flames engulfed the city as the defenders fought valiantly but in vain. By December 27, Kosoko's forces were defeated, and the warrior king fled into exile. With Kosoko gone, Akintoye was restored to the throne. He wasted no time signing a treaty with the British, officially abolishing the slave trade in Lagos. The treaty also declared Lagos a free port, opening its doors to legitimate commerce and setting the stage for its transformation into a modern city. From this point, the independence of Lagos existed on paper only. The resident British consul was the effective ruler. So in July 1861, when the British anchored their warship within firing range of the Oba's palace and told Oba Dosunmu, Akintoye's son, who took over after his death, to sign a treaty of cession, it was a done deal. The treaty promised Dosunmu a pension and ceremonial respect, but real power shifted totally to the British governor. Lagos became a British crown colony and the gateway for British expansion inland. Following the 1851 bombardment, half of the population of Lagos fled with Kosoko. Because of this, there was a need to repopulate the island. The influx of returned slaves, especially the Sierra Leonean Creoles and the Brazilians, increased dramatically. The population of the resident British administrators, missionaries, businessmen and other Europeans also grew dramatically. Initially, Lagos as a British Crown colony was administered separately until 1866, when it was made part of the British West African settlements and put under the authority of Freetown, Sierra Leone. Due to further reorganization, it became part of the Gold Coast, modern Ghana, colony in 1874, but in 1886 it again achieved separate status under a British governor, until 1906 when it was amalgamated with the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. Under colonial rule, Lagos was transformed into a hub for legitimate trade. Palm oil, cotton, and cocoa flowed through its ports, and its population began to grow. Due to the British reluctance to subsidize the cost of running their new colony, Lagos remained very small until the end of the 19th century, but ultimately by the 1890s, infrastructure like railways, roads and schools appeared, albeit catering mostly to the colonial elite and foreign merchants. But all was not harmonious. Lagosians, many of whom were now educated and also influenced by the returned freed slaves from Sierra Leone and Brazil, began to demand greater participation in governance. By the late 19th century, newspapers like the Lagos Times became vocal platforms for political discourse. In 1906, Lagos was merged into the Southern Protectorate of Nigeria, part of the British strategy to consolidate their hold over the territory. This period saw the city's urban expansion, with the development of Lagos Island as a commercial hub and the rise of Ikoyi as a European residential area. 1914 saw the questionable amalgamation of the Southern and Northern Protectorates by Frederick Lugard for economic reasons. And Lagos became the capital of the colony and Protectorate of Nigeria. However, it also marked the beginning of Nigerian nationalism. Influential Lagosians, such as Herbert Macaulay, became outspoken critics of colonial rule. Macaulay, often called the father of Nigerian nationalism, used his charisma and the press to rally Lagosians against unfair colonial policies. Meanwhile, the city's population continued to grow as people from across Nigeria and West Africa moved to Lagos for opportunities. By the time the Second World War began, Lagos was not just an economic center but also a political nerve center, laying the groundwork for the independence movement. The post-World War years brought rapid political changes. Lagos became the epicenter of Nigeria's push for independence. The National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, found strong support among Lagosians, who were eager to end colonial rule. On October 1, 1960, Nigeria gained independence, and Lagos became the capital of a new sovereign nation. It was a jubilant time, with Lagosians proud to host the birth of the country's democracy. However, the honeymoon was short-lived. On the 6th of July 1967, Nigeria plunged into civil war, and Lagos, as the capital, became a refuge for people displaced by the conflict. The city grew rapidly, and its infrastructure struggled to keep up. But after the war, in the 1970s, Lagos was booming, fueled by Nigeria's oil wealth. Skyscrapers rose, and the city's ports became some of the busiest in Africa. But with prosperity came problems. Unchecked migration led to overcrowding, and corruption and mismanagement began to plague the city. Despite this, Lagos remained Nigeria's nerve center until 1991, when the government officially moved the capital to Abuja to ease congestion and reduce ethnic tensions. Although Lagos was no longer the political capital, it remained Nigeria's economic and cultural heartbeat. During the 1990s, however, Lagos faced significant challenges. Military rule under leaders like Sani Abacha led to economic stagnation, and Lagos became notorious for its chaotic traffic, overpopulation, and deteriorating infrastructure. But Lagosians are nothing if not resilient. The late 1990s brought democracy, and with it, hope for a brighter future. Governors like Bola Tinubu began laying the groundwork for modernizing Lagos, focusing on improving transportation, infrastructure, and governance. By the 2000s, Lagos was transforming at an unprecedented pace. The city embraced its identity as Nigeria's commercial capital, with industries ranging from finance to entertainment booming. The rise of Nollywood and Afrobeat turned Lagos into a global cultural powerhouse, attracting talent and attention from across the world. Key developments including the improvements in transportation, like the launch of the Lagos Bus Rapid Transit (BRT) system and ongoing work on the light rail networks pushed Lagos further along. Despite its progress, Lagos energy and innovation coexist with challenges like traffic congestion, inadequate housing, and environmental concerns. Today, Lagos is more than a city, it's a phenomenon. With a population of over 20 million, it is the largest city in Africa and one of the fastest-growing urban centers in the world. Its energy, diversity, and creativity make it a magnet for dreamers and doers alike. Its journey from a small fishing village to a megacity is a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people. As Lagos continues to evolve, its story remains one of survival, ambition, and unrelenting transformation. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.